In the frozen skies above the Eastern Front, where icy winds carved through aluminum and steel like knives through cloth, a single Messerschmitt Bf-109 sliced through the clouds at breakneck speed, its engines screaming like a wounded predator. And inside that cockpit sat the Luftwaffe's most mysterious ace, a pilot so skilled, so lethal, and so impossibly precise that even his enemies spoke his name with a mix of fear and disbelief. Yet on this day, this bitter, gray, death-laden day, something unfolded that no pilot, no commander, no historian could ever explain. For as tracer rounds stitched across the sky and Soviet Yak fighters closed in from all directions, the ace banked left, dove into a spiral meant to escape certain death, and then, before the eyes of nearly 24 pilots on both sides, his aircraft simply vanished, dissolving into a veil of smoke, cloud, and chaos without leaving a single trace of wreckage, radio contact, or parachute. And the moment stretched into a silence so chilling that even the roar of engines felt muted, as if the war itself paused to witness a disappearance that defied every physical law, every military record, every eyewitness account, while German command scrambled to understand how an elite pilot, one who had survived hundreds of missions, dozens of ambushes, and countless mechanical failures, could simply evaporate from an open sky, with no explosion, no debris, no distress call, just an empty patch of air where a legend once flew. And rumors spread like wildfire across air bases and barracks. Whispers of betrayal, sabotage, secret weapons, or something far darker, something beyond normal wartime logic. Because how does a fighter ace vanish mid-combat in broad daylight as if swallowed by the sky itself? And why did the Luftwaffe immediately seal his records, lock his mission logs, and threaten anyone who asked questions, creating a shroud of secrecy so thick that even decades after the war ended, historians still could not piece together the truth of what happened in those final seconds. The exact moment when the ace crossed a threshold no one could see. A moment frozen in time until 75 years later. Deep inside, a remote forest no human had entered for almost a century. A hiking team stumbled upon something metal half-buried under moss and roots. It's an aircraft skeleton with markings that should not exist. Panels torn open in ways no crash could explain, and inside the cockpit, something even more disturbing that would unravel everything we thought we knew about his disappearance and ignite. One of the greatest WW2 mysteries of all time, asterisk. When the hikers pushed deeper into the untouched forest in 2019, guided only by fading daylight, a malfunctioning GPS, and an uneasy sense that they were trespassing somewhere in nature never intended humans to enter, they stumbled upon a clearing, so unnaturally silent that even birds refused to cross it, and from beneath a thick blanket of moss, twisted roots, and decades of decay, the unmistakable silhouette of a World War II aircraft emerged like a fossilized ghost. Its frame warped, its metal skin fractured, its wings half swallowed by the earth, yet somehow impossibly. Its Luftwaffe insignia remained visible, sharp, as if time itself had spared it. And as the hikers cleared away leaves and mud, they realized with growing disbelief that the cockpit canopy was still sealed from the inside. Its glass clouded and fractured, but intact enough to show a human silhouette slumped over the instruments. A shape so still and so perfectly preserved, it sent a jolt of primal fear through them. For this was not supposed to exist. Not here, not now. Not after 75 years, because this area was thousands of kilometers from any recorded Luftwaffe flight path, far beyond the operational range of a Bf-109, and yet here it was. A machine that vanished in battle, suddenly reappearing in a forest no human had reached for generations. And as they pried open the canopy, the stench of old fuel and preserved leather spilled into the air, along with a wave of dread. Because inside sat the remains of the ace himself, still strapped in, hands frozen in a gripping posture around the controls, as if he had died mid-maneuver. But what disturbed them most was the impossible fact that the cockpit instruments showed no signs of catastrophic impact. No shattered gauges, no collapsing metal, nothing to suggest a crash, but rather the eerie stillness of a plane that had simply landed or been placed there without violence. And the pilot's bones showed no signs of trauma, no burns, no fractures. Nothing that aligned with mid-air disappearance or violent crash. And next to his logbook lay a final entry written in shaky handwriting, time-stamped hours after he vanished from the sky. The message short, cryptic, and chilling. I am not alone. They followed me into the cloud, line that sent shockwaves through historians and aviation experts because no one could explain how he wrote it. How he survived long enough to do so? Or what they referred to. And when investigators analyzed the wreckage, they found anomalies in the metal bazaar warping patterns. Microfractures resembling exposure to extreme magnetic distortion, and readings that suggested the aircraft had been subjected to conditions completely unknown to World War II aviation, sparking theories of secret weapons, failed experiments, time distortion, or classified missions so deeply buried that even modern archives refuse to acknowledge them. And the more they uncovered, the more the impossible became undeniable. The ace had not simply crashed. He had vanished and reappeared hundreds of kilometers off course under circumstances no human technology of 1944 could produce, setting the stage for a revelation so huge, so frightening, and so unexplainable that it would reshape everything we believed about his final mission. Asterisk. As investigators began reconstructing the ACE's final flight path, they discovered anomalies so staggering, so mathematically impossible, that veteran pilots, radar historians, and flight analysts were left speechless. For according to the fragmented radar data recovered from declassified Allied and German sources, the ACE's aircraft seen vanishing in a burst of smoke. During the chaotic air, battle did not fall from the sky in flames as every pilot in the engagement swore they witnessed, but instead appeared intermittently on scattered long-range tracking logs, each blip occurring hundreds of kilometers apart within minutes, as if the aircraft were teleporting, skipping across the continent in impossible leaps, defying physics, fuel limits, engine capability, and every law of conventional aviation. And as technicians layered the radar signatures together, they noticed the pattern formed a jagged, looping path through regions known for electromagnetic disturbances, strange wartime experiments, and secret bases rumored to have conducted classified research into atmospheric manipulation and radio wave distortion. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Eyewitness accounts described a shimmering cloud, forming around the ACE's aircraft moments before it disappeared, a swirling distortion that swallowed the plane whole and left only a fading contrail behind. And one pilot reported seeing sparks or arcs of lightning swirling around the aircraft even though the sky was clear, a phenomenon later matched to rare electromagnetic storms that occur in the ionosphere, the kind artificially induced during secret wartime tests in both Allied and Axis laboratories. And when forensic teams analyzed soil samples from the crash site in 2019, they found microscopic metallic residue fused into the ground. Residue identical to samples found near abandoned German research facilities that had experimented with rotating electromagnetic fields during the late stages of the war, fueling speculation that the ACE had unknowingly flown through the aftermath of a field test, or worse, that he had been targeted by a prototype weapon designed not to destroy aircraft, but to interfere with the laws of motion and space, pulling the plane into a corridor of distorted atmosphere and spitting it out thousands of kilometers off course. And as intelligence archivists traced the ACE's final radio transmissions, they found chilling irregularities, bursts of static that contained faint harmonic patterns, frequencies modulated in ways no World War II air radio could naturally produce, almost like coded signals piggybacking on the static. And within these harmonic patterns was a repeating oscillation, identical to signatures found in classified Japanese and German experiments attempting to bend radar waves and conceal aircraft via atmospheric distortion, suggesting that the ACE's plane wasn't simply lost, it was caught, trapped, or redirected by a technology so secret, so unstable, and so dangerously experimental that even today, military historians hesitate to speculate openly. And when analysts simulated the reconstructed flight path digitally, The model produced a horrifying revelation between his disappearance and his aircraft's final resting location. The Ace had traveled a trajectory that would have required 3 full fuel tanks, a second engine, and speeds exceeding what any piston-powered fighter could achieve, implying he either hitchhiked on atmospheric currents beyond recorded nature or passed through zones of differential pressure where time and distance warped unpredictably, meaning the Ace may have experienced hours, days, or even minutes while the outside world experienced 75 years, a possibility supported by the eerie preservation of his cockpit instruments and the unweathered ink of his final log entry, as though time around him had paused, stretched, or folded, leaving behind a haunting truth that no one had the courage to accept. The Ace's disappearance was not the result of enemy fire, mechanical failure, or navigation error, but of something far stranger, far more secret, and far more dangerous, something engineered, hidden, and deliberately erased from history, in the chaos-filled airspace above the Eastern Front, where smoke rose in black coiling pillars and tracer fire stitched red lines through the sky. The most chilling moment in the investigation into the vanished Luftwaffe Ace did not come from wreckage or eyewitness accounts, but from a single radio transmission that air historians still cannot explain. A message that emerged from the static 23 minutes after his fighter was confirmed destroyed. A transmission that should have been impossible, yet was logged by 3 separate Allied interception posts who had no reason to coordinate nor fabricate anything, each one documenting the same faint, broken, eerie voice that whispered over the Luftwaffe frequency as if calling from somewhere far away, not in distance but in reality, and the message was simple. Almost disturbingly calm considering the roaring battle he supposedly died in. Hold formation. I see them. Not clouds. Not smoke. I am not alone. Which made absolutely no sense, because his wingman had watched his Bf-109 spiral downward trailing fire, watched the canopy detach, watched the aircraft shatter in the forest below, leaving no survivors. Yet the transmission carried his exact call sign signature, his exact speech cadence, in the same slight Bavarian accent that all his squadron mates recognized instantly. And what made the mystery darker was that the message ended abruptly with a metallic scraping sound, as if the radio itself had been forcibly wrenched away, followed by a humming tone that Allied technicians could not identify, something too low to be engine noise and too smooth to be interference. A sound that seemed almost mechanical, but not from any machine known in 1944, leading some modern analysts to speculate that whatever he saw in those clouds had nothing to do with Soviet fighters or German aircraft, nothing to do with war at all, but something else entirely. Something that had been reported in dozens of flight logs by both sides of the conflict, yet dismissed every time as stress, fatigue, or hallucination. And this single phantom radio call became the fuel for growing legends among pilots who swore that certain airspaces were haunted not by ghosts, but by the sky itself, as if the atmosphere hid corridors or anomalies or silent watchers that airplanes accidentally crossed into and never returned from. And as the investigation into the Ace's disappearance deepened, researchers discovered that this was not the only such transmission made after a pilot's confirmed death, but it was the clearest, the most documented, and the most recent relative to wreckage recovery. So when the team analyzing the crash in 2019 sent a recording of the surviving copy through modern spectral software, the results were even stranger. A faint secondary voice layered beneath the Ace's speech. Not human, not German, not any language at all, but more like a patterned vibration. Something repeating behind his words, as if mimicking speech, but not producing consonants or vowels correctly. And when that hidden sound was isolated and played back, the technicians reportedly refused to continue, claiming it produced a physical pressure in the room, a feeling of being observed, and one researcher fainted during the playback, prompting the team to halt analysis entirely, seal the audio behind official classification, and issue a public statement that no usable recording existed, a statement proven false when fragments leaked months later, confirming the transmission was not only real but deeply unsettling, pushing the mystery from a historical curiosity into something far more disturbing, raising the question nobody wants to ask in aviation history: what exactly was flying over the Eastern Front that day? Something human, something mechanical, or something that neither side of the war had the technology to comprehend? Asterisk. And as post-war investigators dug deeper into Luftwaffe archives, they uncovered something even more unsettling the missing ace had reported: strange aerial reflections in his personal flight log months before the incident, shimmering distortions that followed his aircraft at altitudes no Soviet fighter could reach. Distortions that moved with deliberate changes of direction rather than drifting with wind currents. And one of his entries described a mirror plane that appeared beside him for 7 seconds, copying his angle and speed but showing no markings, no canopy, no wings, nothing but a smooth metallic surface reflecting the clouds like liquid steel. And when he banked sharply to test whether it was an illusion or atmospheric trick, the reflection bank was delayed by only half a second, as if whatever the object was had to interpret the movement rather than anticipate it. Making the ace write in his logbook, "It learns. It watches. I do not think it attacks." This note was dismissed by his superiors as combat fatigue. But the logbook recovered in 2019 confirmed with his signature that the entry was real, prompting aviation historians to propose the possibility that the ace had been encountering a classified German aircraft under development. But this theory collapsed when historians cross-referenced prototype timelines. No German jet, glider, or experimental craft of that shape existed. Not even on paper, meaning whatever had reflected him was not a Luftwaffe asset, nor a Soviet one, nor anything explained by the technology of the era, leaving researchers with a growing unease that his disappearance was not a simple wartime loss, but the culmination of a months-long observation by something that operated beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft. The deeper researchers went, the more the 2019 crash recovery baffled them. The aircraft's remains showed structural distortions inconsistent with a normal crash, parts twisted in symmetrical spirals as though pulled by external force rather than smashed by impact. And the metallurgical analysis showed heat damage that was neither from fire nor explosion, but from exposure to sustained, the kind produced by no known WW2 weapon. Even stranger, the cockpit instruments were fused in the off position, suggesting the aircraft lost all electrical power simultaneously, not gradually, which aligned disturbingly well with the ace's final pre-disappearance radar remarks. In his squadron's combat report, where he noted the air around me feels wrong, static is, building an observation consistent with sudden electromagnetic interference, something that could disable a fighter's systems instantly. And the more the data stacked, the more one question became impossible to ignore. What if his fighter didn't crash because of damage from Soviet fire? What if the crash was the result of an encounter with whatever had stalked him in the months prior, the mirror plane that mimicked him, the distortion that followed him, the anomaly that reproduced his voice long after death? Because when the wreckage was lifted from the soil, the team discovered one last impossible detail. The remains of the fuselage bore an indentation perfectly, matching the warped shape of a circular force, almost like a pressure bubble, something compressing the airframe uniformly from all angles. A phenomenon seen nowhere in historical crash records, yet curiously similar to descriptions by dozens of modern pilots who claim their aircraft were approached by silent spherical anomalies during high-altitude patrols, one investigator later wrote. In his private report, leaked in fragments, that examining the wreck of the Ace's fighter felt like opening a grave that didn't want to be opened, and when satellite scans around the crash site in 2019 revealed residual electromagnetic signatures inconsistent with anything from the era, the team had to accept the possibility that they were not just handling a wartime relic, but evidence of an event that modern aviation science still cannot explain, which is why the government quietly closed the area again after the recovery, posting no explanation, sealing documents, and refusing interviews, because whatever happened to that Luftwaffe ace wasn't simply a loss of aircraft. It was the continuation of a pattern seen by pilots across nations and decades. A pattern of aircraft vanishing, radios transmitting after destruction, and unidentified aerial reflections appearing in combat theaters as though observing human conflict, waiting for something, or studying something, and perhaps the ace, in those final moments before he disappeared from radar, understood this better than anyone. Because his last intelligible squadron message before the crash, long before the impossible phantom call, was a chilling whisper that only the ground operator caught. They were never clouds. As investigators pushed deeper into the chain of events leading up to the Luftwaffe ace's vanishing, they uncovered a disturbing layer of wartime intelligence buried underneath decades of silence. And it began with a sealed archive box marked only with a red diagonal. /, internal Luftwaffe symbol used to indicate files that were never meant to be reopened, inside which lay transcript fragments, revealing that the ace had been part of an incident so unusual the German High Command refused to record it in official logs. An incident known internally as Der Schwarzbogen, the Black Arc, referring to a silent, crescent-shaped form observed by multiple pilots at high altitude during the spring of 1944. A shape that behaved not like an aircraft, but like a visual tear in the sky. Something that did not move through clouds but displaced them, bending them around its contour as if the atmosphere itself were folding inward. And several pilots, including the missing ace, reported that whenever this black arc appeared, their engines sputtered, their radio static intensified, and the temperature inside the cockpit dropped sharply, despite being at cruising altitude, where temperatures should remain constant once stabilized, leading one pilot to describe the arc as a hole in warmth itself, an expression dismissed as combat stress, until the missing ace submitted a detailed technical sketch of the anomaly. One so precise, it astonished Luftwaffe engineers, because the curvature he drew matched no aerodynamic structure and no natural atmospheric formation. Yet the bending patterns he diagrammed around it resembled gravitational lensing effects that would not be scientifically described until decades later. Long after the war ended, he had seen something impossible, and he had seen it more than once. And the transcripts showed that engineers were ordered to silence the pilots, confiscate sketches, and restrict any further reporting. Not because they feared enemy intelligence, but because they feared panic among their own fighter groups. As the black arc seemed to appear selectively only near aircraft that had achieved high kill counts, only near pilots with reputations for composure, and always during missions where visibility was excellent, almost as though the arc wanted to be seen by specific people and ignored by the inexperienced. Something that suggested intention, intelligence, or at the very least a consistent pattern beyond coincidence. The missing ace was the most experienced of them all, the most respected. And by the time 2019 excavators uncovered his wreck, it became clear that he had been the primary target of the arc's attention. For inside the sealed box of transcripts was a chilling note scrawled by a Luftwaffe intelligence officer, stating if the arc follows anyone, it follows him in the final moments of this astonishing saga, when the world believed the Luftwaffe ace had vanished forever into the burning chaos of World War II. The truth that emerged 75 years later unraveled like a tightly coiled spring finally snapping open, revealing layer after layer of chilling detail, unexpected evidence, in a silence that had been carefully and deliberately maintained for decades. Beginning with the discovery of twisted aluminum deep beneath the moss-covered forest floor, a fragment of wreckage so pristine that it looked as if the fire had deliberately avoided it. And investigators, stunned, traced its serial markings to a fighter once believed incinerated beyond recognition. And as forensic teams dug deeper, they unearthed an entire fuselage buried under soil and root webs. The aircraft astonishingly intact, yet contorted in a way that suggested it had not crashed, not spiraled, but had somehow been forced down with a precision and violence that defied conventional mid-air engagement reports. And when the cockpit canopy was finally lifted, its glass fogged from decades of condensation, the interior told a story more haunting than any battlefield log. With controls frozen mid-motion, as if the pilot had been fighting a force no report had ever acknowledged. And as researchers followed every clue, They discovered inconsistencies in wartime records, gaps deliberately left open, reports that contradicted each other, and witness testimonies quietly archived and hidden, pointing to a confrontation far more terrifying than a simple dogfight. A moment where radar operators spotted an unknown object descending at speeds impossible for any aircraft of the era, and witnesses describing flashes of light that were neither cannon bursts nor flames, but something eerily cold, white and silent, and the Ace's final radio transmission. Long thought erased or destroyed, was recovered in fragment form, a chilling audio clip in which his voice, usually calm and unshakable, trembled as he reported, not enemy fighters. Not mechanical failure, but something he described as shadow formations following him beyond the cloud bank. And as historians pieced together the last seconds of his life, they found the oxygen mask still attached, flight suit stiff with age, and a logbook whose final line had been smeared yet still legible. "They are not aircraft," a sentence that defied logic, military explanation, or aviation records. And when the aircraft fragment was tested for chemical residue, the results revealed unknown alloys fused into the metal, compounds not used in any German, Allied, or Soviet manufacturing process at the time, raising the terrifying possibility that his final seconds were spent facing something not acknowledged by any government, and that the wreckage had been quietly relocated and hidden because what it suggested would shatter wartime understanding forever. And the discovery site itself became a sealed investigation zone, with authorities restricting access and collecting every piece of evidence before the public could even glimpse it, further fueling the chilling suspicion that the Ace's disappearance was not a simple wartime tragedy but an encounter with something unrecorded, unexplained, and deeply unsettling. And as the documentary team who first uncovered the site released their findings, they reported strange disruptions in their equipment. Compasses spinning, audio recorders glitching, and drone batteries draining instantly as if the area itself still held remnants of the energy that brought the fighter down. And the forest birds avoiding the wreck site entirely, forming an unnatural ring of silence around the clearing, adding a supernatural weight to the atmosphere. And when the final report was compiled, it concluded not with certainty, but with a chilling line that left more questions than answers. The pilot may not have vanished. He may have been taken from the sky, a suggestion so disturbing that historians argued for its removal. Yet it remained, anchoring the final truth of this once-forgotten legend, a truth that now pulls the viewer deeper into the mystery, gripping their imagination with an ending that doesn't resolve the fear but magnifies it, making them wonder what the pilot truly saw above the battlefield, why his aircraft fell in a way no dogfight could explain, and why, decades later, the wreckage still carried an energy that defied time, logic, and gravity, leaving us with a final, chilling realization that some wartime disappearances were not accidents, not mechanical failures, not enemy fire, but encounters with forces hidden in classified pages and sealed archives, forces that governments still refuse to fully acknowledge. And the story of the Luftwaffe Ace, once dismissed as a wartime myth, now stands as one of the most haunting, inexplicable, and unsettling aviation mysteries ever uncovered. A conclusion that grips the audience, freezes their breath, and forces them to watch until the very last second, and in the last crushing moment of the investigation, long after the Luftwaffe Ace's aircraft was recovered, long after historians, engineers, military analysts, and intelligence officials had tried to fit every fragment into a conventional explanation that simply refused to hold together. The case reached a point where the truth cracked open like a pressure-burst hull, unveiling a reality so disturbing and so meticulously buried that even the most hardened researchers felt their breath lock in their chests. Because as the team re-examined the wreckage under higher resolution, scanners capable of detecting microfractures invisible to the naked eye, they identified patterns of structural warping that matched no known crash behavior. No mid-air collision, no explosive blast, no mechanical malfunction, but instead displayed symmetrical compression marks. If the aircraft had been gripped by forces that applied pressure from multiple angles at once, bending German alloy in ways impossible with 1940s technology, And when investigators cross-referenced these marks with military archives, they uncovered a restricted collection of battlefield reports filed by both German and Allied pilots describing unidentified craft moving in impossible trajectories, accelerating in bursts that defied propeller physics, disappearing through cloud banks without turbulent signatures, and exhibiting cold, silent, light-based emissions identical to what witnesses claimed they saw the night the ace vanished. And when these long-dismissed reports, once labeled hallucinations, stress reactions, or misidentified aircraft, were reevaluated with modern scientific understanding, they revealed correlations so exact that the pattern could no longer be ignored, aligning perfectly with the ace's final radio transmission, aligning perfectly with the marks on his aircraft, aligning perfectly with the strange atmospheric anomalies recorded on the same night by ground radar stations that later swore the data had been corrupted. And as the evidence converged, another chilling discovery emerged: the ace's flight path, reconstructed through recovered navigation instruments, showed a sharp, unnatural deviation seconds before his disappearance, a turn so abrupt that no manned aircraft at the time could have performed it without structural tearing. Yet the airframe recovered in 2019 showed no such tearing only the bizarre compression marks suggesting he had been moved, not maneuvered, and that his aircraft had been forcibly redirected or displaced by an external force that did not rely on aerodynamics or propulsion as humans understood it. And when the investigative team traced the distortion fields in the metal, they detected residual electromagnetic signatures far stronger than anything produced by World War II radar, radio, or weaponry, signatures that should have dissipated decades earlier yet remained faintly present, as if the event that brought the ace down left an imprint deep within the molecular structure of the metal, a fingerprint of something beyond classified technology, beyond wartime innovation, beyond human engineering. And when researchers followed this line of evidence, they uncovered one more layer: an unmarked folder buried in a private military archive containing intercepted Allied intelligence notes referencing unidentified aerial intrusions over European airspace, noting that German high command pilots, including elite aces, had reported being pursued by objects that were not aircraft, and cross-referencing this with crash site data revealed that the aces' disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a series of unexplained wartime vanishings that authorities quietly erased to avoid mass panic. And suddenly the entire narrative shifted, reframing the ace's fate not as a combat loss or a navigational error, but as an encounter with something that military governments on all sides desperately tried to bury: sealing reports, altering logs, and classifying testimonies to protect the public from a truth they were convinced humanity was not ready to confront. And now, after 75 years of silence, misdirection, secrecy, and buried evidence, the recovery of the wreck in 2019 forced the truth back into the light, revealing that the ace had not simply vanished in battle, had not lost control, had not been shot down, but had been intercepted by a force that operated outside the boundaries of known technology, a force still unacknowledged, still unexplained, still feared by governments across the world. And the final realization that the ace's final moments were not spent fighting enemy pilots, but facing something vast, unknown, and unimaginable, casts a long, cold shadow over the entire story, leaving viewers breathless, shaken, and unable to look away as the screen fades, because the truth is not that the pilot vanished into history. It is that history tried to vanish what really happened to him and failed.